Everything you need to know is on Brightspace, and you click on SPED 702, our class, and then scroll down to description of the CAB MR assignments. It'll, depending upon how you access the content, there'll either be a left sidebar that says description of CAB MR assignment, or you'll see a box with the chalkboard in it. And once you're inside that link, you'll scroll down to descriptions of the CAB MR assignment parts. You'll click on number 2, and there are also wonderful exemplars from previous semesters that uh, will will let you see high quality papers that have met the criteria here. So yes, you're going to engage in data recording. You're going to use that recording procedure that you've identified for the target behavior of your focus learner. And you are then going to organize it into some graph, chart, grid. We'll show you examples of these in just a bit. This is just what's coming up. You're going to make some sense of that numerical data, what we call quantitative data, and also the other information that doesn't produce numbers, what we call qualitative data. And you will be writing about, well, what's all this mean, the data that you've collected? You'll be devising a behavior objective for the near future. Well, based upon your analysis of the data, where do you think you can have this student performing a few weeks down the road, or maybe a month down the road? And additionally, you are going to apply certain interventions that you study in the learning modules. Uh, you can do so in real life and report on them, or just hypothetically, if I was to intervene and use that strategy, okay, how would I do so for this particular learner? And it's important to remember to get strategies from the parent video. You'll find that in our syllabus, and you'll find it again on our Brightspace site, where to find this video that guides parents into how they can change behavior for the better in the home. And also, this is where that one self-help book that you gain access to is used. Part 2. You'll remember that there's a site where you can find these self-help books for kids for free. And here are the different parts of your paper, the different subheadings that you'll be addressing. This again is on our Brightspace site inside the description, and you'll also see how this is done in the exemplars. So these are the things that you'll be addressing with a subheading, a bolded subheading for each. So we'll take a look at each one of those sections. You're going to tell us about how you went about collecting data. Were you moving around with a clipboard? Were you in the back of the room trying to be non-disruptive to the process? Or were you teaching at the time and perhaps moving a penny from one pocket to the other pocket each time you spotted the behavior? Pencil and paper? Were you recording this on your phone? How long were you observing during the different observation periods? Sometimes it might be 10 minutes, other times it might be a 47-minute period. Okay. If you decide to engage in interval recording, where at the end of a time span, you're notified and you have to enter a yes mark or a no mark. Well, what were your marks for? Yes, I saw that behavior happen during that span of time, or no, it didn't happen during that time interval. You're using tally marks for frequency recording and different marks for the other procedures. And in fact, in the chat feature, this will help us with our attendance tonight. If you would indicate which recording procedure you plan on using to collect data for part two. And thank you for that. Please do that now. Well, it helps the reader to have the data presented in some sort of pictorial form. It helps us grasp very quickly what you found, and we can say, oh, okay, I see more so during the early part of the day versus the end of the day. Or, gee, as the medication wore off, we tended to see more. And we would love to have your actual data recording sheets. You see there in the lower, uh, and my screen, it's the lower left, the data sheet. And oh, was recording hitting, and I see the definition there. Mm-hmm. And when when this person was recording on this date during recess, it was 15 minutes long. Yes, the behavior that was defined above. Wow, look at all those instances of of uh, of hitting, and yes, putting that into some pictorial form, but perhaps attaching those data sheets to the end. When I see those, I'm saying, okay, I know this actually did happen, verifies what it is I'm seeing in the charts or the graphs. And then you've got to make some sort of sense of this. Well, based upon your data, what can you conclude? Or maybe you can't conclude, but what can you presume? What's a possible scenario? Uh, did the numbers change by day to day or time of day? Did the behavior seem to change based upon the subject matter? Perhaps the student has more difficulties with reading than they do in um, other areas where reading is not required. Do you see a difference by subject matter or teacher who is teaching? And, while you haven't collected data on all the kids in the classroom, just based upon your observations, does the student's frequency or duration or persistence of the behavior seem any different from what the other kids are showing with regards to that particular behavior? Yes, you'll be writing a behavioral objective, a future goal, a short-term goal. What do you want to accomplish in the next few weeks or perhaps a couple of months? And just like the definition of your target behavior, it's stated in, yes, I'm sure you know by now, observable and measurable terms, and in that precise professional language. So we have something along this line, and there'll be examples on Brightspace in the description of the papers of what a behavioral objective looks like. And it's got to have a condition, like the circumstances that are occurring. Oh, during the morning meeting, who are we talking about? Who are we gathering data on? Oh, Tyrese. And what's the defined action? Oh, buttocks in contact with horizontal plane of chair. We got to have the behavior. And where do we think we can have this student functioning? Just a ways down the road. Oh, when I do check on the behavior, perhaps using momentary time sampling, a signal goes off. And at that very moment, is the behavior happening? And I make a yes mark or a no mark. And I think I can have him up to 70% of the total times that I look over, just based upon the interventions that I have available and whether I think they would work or whether they are working if I've actually implemented them. All right, so precise, observable, measurable, and stated in the future tense, because while our target behavior definition was for a behavior we see now, there it is, the present tense. our behavioral objective, our short-term goal, is what we expect in the future. So we use the future tense, the will. And you see that we can, the things that are involved in a behavioral objective. Who is the actor? What's the defined behavior? Under what circumstances? And to what degree do we think we can have this student performing better in the short-term future? And Dr. T, I am not seeing numbers on my for my slides. So when we get to the
Oh, you
slide
took
where
my
you
you
take,
took my you took my slides.
excuse me,
You took my slides.
what?
Yeah, you're already on 22. You,
Oh
you
my goodness. All
uh,
right. Well, I hate to cut you out there, sir. Anytime you want to take over, you let me know. All right.
I would just say if we could just take a second because a lot of people put in you asked them to talk about the recordancy, and a lot of people are very confident with that, and they put that into the chat. I appreciate that. Um, so there were a few people that were still unsure. So I just wanted to say, whether you're in my section or Dr. Mack's section, um, we have a couple opportunities to support you if you're unsure, um, even at this point, at least particularly in my section. So there was an opportunity to submit your target behavior and recording a little bit earlier on the discussion thread. And we gave you an opportunity to submit a rough draft of your work before the deadline, before Sunday. Um, and then that would give us an opportunity to give you feedback or make suggestions. Where it gets difficult here is that um, we do run out of time. I mean, we're already 1 month into this semester, and it's basically 3 months, maybe 4 months. But if you count 3 months, if you take the break that we're going to have in April, so it's good that you make choices now or ask us for feedback or use our office hours to discuss the things, or even afterwards the class tonight, if you're unsure, to talk about us, because you need to do part one to do part two. You cannot do part two without submitting part one and getting feedback from us. That is very, very important. Okay, so if you're a little bit behind on part one, which is supposed to be submitted on Sunday, please reach out to us, tell us where you're at, submit things, and keep us in the loop. Is that fair, Dr. Mack?
Yep. After class or during our office hours or via email, we're very pleased to help you. Talking
All right.
about those behavioral objectives and how we want to include four parts to it: the actor, the behavior, the condition, and where we think we can have the student performing in the short term. Let's just do a little mental exercise. No need to enter anything into the chat, but just thinking to yourself here. Kong Ting will reduce his elopements, and that's been defined as exiting past the classroom door before obtaining permission to do so, to 3 times or fewer during the school day. Okay, so you're thinking, who is the actor? Who is the student, the learner? And yes, you've identified him as Kong Ting. So what behavior have we defined? You're spotting that? Yep, it's in the parentheses. And let's see, under which conditions? Oh, there it is at the tail end, during the school day. And where do we think we can have the student performing? We think we can cut down the number of elopements to 3 times or fewer. Another quick one here with Juanita. She tends to call out and, oh my goodness, that isn't defined. there's a first flaw in our short-term goal, unless we've defined it previously, but it wouldn't be nice to see it here again, that offers commentary before receiving permission to do so. And you see here, okay, that's the behavior. We know the actor. Under what conditions? Ah, there it is, the teacher presentation part of the lesson. And what's the criteria, the degree? We think we can have Juanita, she'll still be calling out, giving these comments before receiving permission to do so, but we think we can cut it down to 2 times or fewer. Why don't you just select one of those? Identify the different parts in your mind. And if you'd like to discuss any of these afterwards, just take a screenshot or ask us to call up this particular slide again, and we'll talk it over with you. And then comes the part of your paper where we actually describe how the interventions that are required to apply in part 2, how those interventions would be used with your focus learner. You've got a choice of two, well, there are many more, but you have a choice of task analysis or shaping, sort of close cousins for steps that we take a student through as we improve their behavior. Uh, Task analysis, we break it down into the steps to be followed. Um, for example, if it were washing clothes, okay, step 1, locate the clothing that is dirty. Step 2, place it in a basket. Step 3, hold the basket, take the basket to the laundry room, and you get the idea, one step after the another. We're shaping, we just require more of a behavior the student is already capable of showing, but the student only shows the behavior 10% of the time. Okay, so we're going to set a short-term goal of 20% of the time, then 30%, then 40%. The student can already show the behavior, but it's not a skill deficit, it's a performance deficit. The student isn't showing it to the degree we would like. And so we keep upping the ante as the student masters a certain level of performance. And then there's the $20 term for a $1 idea, differential reinforcement, that we reward or reinforce depending on whether the student meets a criteria. So we reinforce differentially. And there are a number of different types. There's differential reinforcement of lower rates of behavior, DRL. And many of you will be trying to decrease the number of times the student shows the behavior. That's differential reinforcement of lower rates of the behavior. Others of you have a student who's showing the appropriate behavior, but we'd like to see it more so. Well, we're going to differentially reinforce more higher levels of that behavior, and you'll study the other ones in the Powerful Procedures learning module. Another one in the Powerful Procedures module is self-recording. We want to reduce our outer control and by having the student develop more inner control, and they record their own behavior. We involve them in their own behavior change. And you'll be applying that procedure to your learner. There's something called ABC analysis that we're going to be getting into that we'll be looking at. Well, the B stands for behavior. And then we're going to look at what comes before it, the A, the antecedent, what sets it off, what sparks that behavior, and C, the consequence, what followed that behavior. Because we know humans show a behavior for a reason, and that consequence is a payoff. But we punish the student, we chastise the student. Well, for some reason, that is rewarding to the student, and we need to figure out what else to do. We'll be getting into that in a little bit. And Dr. T, do be sure to stop me when we get to your next couple of slides. But yes, we'll be using that ABC analysis to help us write a behavior replacement plan. These are forms you're going to complete and include in part two. You'll also be engaging in another assessment procedure to go along with that ABC analysis called mistaken goals analysis. Both again found in our learning modules. We'll be getting into mistaken goals analysis in just a bit. And then you'll be offering some suggestions to the folks at home, the parents and the home adults, the guardians, regarding how they can team up with us and also strategies they can use in the home. And that's where those self-help books, you only select one, okay? You'll be um, pulling out ideas from the selected self-help book, and you'll be pulling out ideas from that parent video series. Again, you'll be directed to those in the learning modules. Ah, yes, ABC. It's as easy as one, two, three. And just to bring us back up to speed with that, when we see a behavior, we say, what happened just before it? That is called the antecedent, the most recent stimuli, the things that happened before the antecedent that lowered the kid's resistance to handle that last final stimuli, the antecedent. We call those setting events. That the student was, I think we mentioned this last week, was walking down the street after a rainstorm, and a car came by and splashed the puddle up onto them. Other kids laughed. The student got to school, was late, and ended up getting a pink slip, which results in detention. And so the day is just not going good. And then the teacher gives a direction to engage in a task, and the kid says, I ain't doing this. Why did the kid say that to a direction that usually doesn't bring about that sort of behavior? Oh, the direction is the antecedent, but there were setting events before that that lowered the kid's ability to handle stress and demands and responsibilities. And then whatever follows that behavior is what's keeping it going. Humans show behaviors because there's a payoff. Something positive comes to us, positive reinforcement, or we either escape a bad situation, a negative situation, or we never get into that negative situation. We avoid it, negative reinforcement. And this is, you'll be given a number of forms that you can use in your ABC analysis. You only have to analyze one situation that happened. But were you to um, collect more of these antecedent behavior consequence episodes for delivery to the IEP team, or when the IEP team is developing a BIP, a behavior intervention plan, you might have a form like this. And on what day, at what time did that behavior happen? And what came before it? What followed it? Well, we should probably put in another column there. Once the consequence happened, whatever followed that behavior, How did the student respond to that consequence?
I think Dr. Mack,
Yes.
so in the papers, you can look at the exemplars. We do ask that there's many different forms to use this A, B, C analysis. So like the form that Dr. Mack is showing you right now could happen over multiple days. It's taking the incident, it's looking at the antecedent, behavior, and consequence. There's other forms that are asking you to look at in time for 20 minutes, what were all the antecedents, behavior, and consequences. Um, we used to do an activity in this class on a sitcom, because sitcoms are all based on antecedents, behavior, and consequences, where you can analyze for 10 minutes what's happening in the comedy and kind of go crazy. The point is that we are asking you to do this form, and then this form becomes in its own way, it's a source of data. When whatever form you use, that data, you have to interpret that data and what does it mean. Um, so look at the forms that we provide because some of them could happen over a couple of days, some of them could happen within like a 20-minute period. Um, but you're trying to collect, even though you collected data really in part one, and you're sharing that data for part two. Excuse me, for part two, at the beginning of part two, you're providing some data that you're looking at and then analyzing it. The other part of part two is kind of looking at that data and trying to put it into this chart in different ways. So maybe you collected data over one day, maybe you collected data over multiple days. So choose your chart to kind of look at it from an ABC perspective. And the exemplar provides one. And if you submit for my class earlier, I can give you feedback on that. And we'll have time in our next session where you can get feedback from each other about your data and your analysis about the ABC. Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Mack. Hope that was helpful.
Glad you did. And, we've been together now for about an hour. Why don't we just take a short detour? And in the chat feature, would you enter your favorite flavor of ice cream? Let's just take a think of some different thoughts at this point.
Okay. Well, we have cookies and cream, anything, salted cotton candy. There's a ice cream called cotton candy. Oh my gosh, Rocky Road. I definitely like Rocky Road. A lot of cookies and cream, cake butter, mint chocolate, chocolate chip, mint chocolate, cookies and cream, rum raisin. Yeah. Oh boy.
Yes, the correct answer is rum raisin or pistachio. So for the others who entered other ones,
Sorry,
no,
Dr. Mac. Nobody put pistachio. That was definitely you.
I don't know what's happening
Uh,
this semester. All right,
there's no pistachio. Uh,
all right.
but yeah, rum raisin and yes, Jamaican, love it. Uh, yeah.
Oh, I'm unfamiliar with that one. All right.
Well,
Well, anyhow,
I think they're saying rum raisin is a Jamaican the islands, a little bit of rum. Anytime you put rum, that's a great one, yeah. Black raspberry, that's great. It is. Thank you, Rochelle. Thanks for reminding us. All
all
right, we'll go
right.
back to Dr. Mac. Thank you.
Yes, and if you're going down to Manhattan, Chinatown, be sure to go to the ice cream shop that has the yellow flag with the red dragon on it out in front. They have flavors that you might not be able to imagine otherwise. And yeah, do give that a try if you're down that way. Let us then return to our topic of the evening. One of them, the ABC analysis and making use of it. Whoops, and let's try that. Yeah, you'll be filling out a form that is provided. It will go into your part two, where you will write about how you would intervene uh, to prevent the behavior by either addressing those setting events or that stimulus, that final stimulus that tends to set it off, that antecedent. How do we keep that from happening? Because if the antecedent doesn't happen, we're hoping then that the behavior won't happen. And some of the things that we do is, we sit certain students away from other students, and that sitting near them tends to be setting events. And then one of those other students will say something about a female family member, and that's the antecedent that then sets off the aggression. If a student really doesn't enjoy the assistance from one of the paraprofessionals, well, we can prevent the approach of that paraprofessional from setting off a tantruming behavior by having another paraprofessional approach that student. Certainly, we want to help the student become more comfortable with the initial paraprofessional, but right now we just prevent the behavior by preventing the antecedent from happening. Or we could go to the other side of the B. We prevent the payoff from happening, that reinforcing consequence for that misbehavior. And what we'll try to do is prompt a replacement behavior. We'll pull out the B and insert another B, an appropriate behavior. Maybe it's one that can't be, this replacement behavior can't be done at the same time. Excuse me, the inappropriate behavior can't be done at the same time as the replacement behavior. We block that misbehavior in a procedure known as DRI, differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors. You'll study it in the module. Again, big words or rather simplistic ideas. Well, we have to be sure that the replacement behavior meets the same function. I mean, if the function is sensory stimulation or gaining attention, well, the replacement behavior has to meet that same need, or else the student's going to say, sorry, this new behavior just doesn't meet what I'm looking for. And our reinforcement of that new behavior has to provide at least as much as the previous behavior, the misbehavior gained, or else the student's going to say, I'm not switching that out. The payoff's not as good. So in the chat feature, what are some of the needs that students have? Some of the functions of the behavior, some of the reasons that students show behavior. In the chat, especially as you think about your focus learner, why do you think that focus learner is showing the behavior? What is the need or the function, the reason?
Yeah, so some great responses, Dr. Mack. And I would like to, and I value all of them. Thank you, because multiple of you have put trauma. I want to clarify a couple of the words that Dr. Mack is mentioning. When we look at antecedent and behavior and consequences and how that is separate from function of behavior. So if you look at the modules that we provided, from a traditional perspective, there are two functions, right? You're seeking attention or you're trying to avoid. There are in the last 10 years more things that are based on sensory issues of functions, particularly in the autism spectrum and things like that. Trauma itself is an interesting and complex issue because trauma can be a consequence, it can also be an antecedent. But then thinking about trauma as a function, while that makes sense for our exercise, I this is my personal view. I would try to separate trauma in the other parts of antecedents or consequences versus the function itself. In other words, the trauma could be an influence on why the function is to avoid or to seek attention, but it is probably something that would fall under antecedents or consequences from a therapeutic standpoint.
Yes, and as we look at various needs, some of which have developed down at the bottom of the slide, there are many, many more.
We'll let that antecedent, behavior, consequences, yeah,
Yeah.
function. Thank
And
you. Yeah.
the safety part there, that if a student um, is trying to avoid the trauma, if it happens to be like a physical or intellectual or psychological abuse. Uh, yeah,
I'm just
yeah,
saying that,
yeah.
Dr. Mack, because you said you put in there to put functions, and I think some of the stuff that you're saying when we're talking, I think there's talking about needs that you put down here that are very good. But maybe you could clarify for us. When we look at the needs of the students, do they all fit under the realm of function, or do they also fit under the realm of antecedent or consequences? How would we, where when we're doing all this data and this analysis, do we put these needs that you put?
Oh, I would see them as the antecedent, the consequence, and the function, depending upon the behavior and the student.
Okay.
That, but what we can intellectually grapple with this a wee bit later.
Okay,
But the
great.
students, the consequence may be that the student receives the attention that he or she is seeking. Um, but so it could be a consequence, but it's the function, the reason for the behavior. And we may have a professional disagreement, but not necessary to resolve it for part two of your paper.
Yeah.
So let us then continue on. This is one of the forms that you will be completing as you read about the various instructional strategies and the ABC analysis. You will be completing a form that we're going to see in just a bit. But yeah, how are you going to prevent the setting events from occurring? How can we lessen the impact of the antecedent, the final stimuli before the behavior? And how can we work with the consequence so that we make sure this behavior doesn't get the payoff that it typically does, or we provide reinforcement for the replacement behavior? Here's an example that you will see in one of the exemplars. Gee, Mark tends to refuse assignments, if I'm remembering. Yep. And gee, we'll just make sure that he's given assignments during independent work that reflect his academic ability. So the student will know that he or she will receive something on his or her or their level. Mark here. And then what can we do to prompt a replacement behavior or keep the misbehavior from happening? You'll be entering different strategies that different ways that you would address each of these four categories. Just be aware you have a form to fill out. You'll get all the information in the learning module, and Dr. Turner and I will be available all during the month of March to give you assistance if you happen to be struggling with this particular part. But do go to those exemplars first, and I think they'll give you a good idea of what it is that we're looking for. And there's a second form to complete where you will have conducted the ABC analysis and added on setting events in the before the antecedent. You'll be taking an educated guess at the function, but then see where that red X is. We don't want the antecedent to prompt that problem behavior to be. We want a new behavior to surface at the presentation of the antecedent. You will identify that replacement behavior that meets the same function or need, and then how you're going to go about reinforcing it so that the replacement behavior takes over for the misbehavior. There's an example of it. Being presented with the classwork that he perceives to be too difficult has led to the student just getting up and leaving the table in the past. But we are going to promote this new behavior, the replacement behavior, B2, where the student will remain at the seat. Doesn't have to do the work, just has to remain in the seat. That's a behavior we're working on. And then the reinforcement will be that we'll provide assistance and we'll provide work on the student's level. We'll allow them to have some great choices during choice time later if the student stays in the seat. More on that as you get into part two.
So I would just say, Dr. Mack, sorry to interrupt again. One thing that I've noticed in the class where people have, when you do part one and you're looking at your target behavior, some of you, and we didn't tell you how to do this, but some of you, your target behavior in some ways is your replacement behavior. That's the ideal behavior. And then some of you, your target behavior is sort of this problem behavior that's coming up. And there, at times, I really value the charts that Dr. Mack has provided because this is my point about the function. When you use the charts and you're trying to work and transition from problem behavior to replacement behavior, and working out what you want to take of that, that's where you have so much rich information that you can really look at the function of the behavior itself. And maybe what you thought was the function of behavior originally, you might change a little bit or you have to go a little bit deeper because, as Dr. Max said, part of the replacement plan is to tie into what was the original function of that specific behavior that you're looking at beginning. So this is it's not rocket science, but it does take collaboration. It does take some redrafts. And I would just kindly ask you to trust the process. We're not asking you to do forms because we're asking you to do all this compliance issues and stuff like that. These forms are there to help weed out your thinking and provide and surface that thinking so that we can look at what's really in that last slide, which he said, all the antecedent behavior, consequences, replacement behavior, and the function of it, and make sure it's aligned. That's going to make an effective plan. Thank you, Dr. Miller.
And thank you, Dr. T. Um, we're presenting a lot of information in a short period of time. Let's say we're together for about an hour and a half tonight. And it can seem confusing, it can seem overwhelming, but you will accomplish it. Folks in the past have done so, especially when you dig into the learning modules. You just say, oh yeah, now I get it. And if there's any other questions, then you pass them by Dr. T or myself. The applied behavior analysis model really gained traction in the 1980s, and it focuses on surface behavior, only what we can witness, only what we can see, hear, or feel. And it does not get at what is underneath the surface, as you see here. That's where a procedure that was quite popular until ABA was made essentially mandatory in the regulations of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Yeah, we're going to move from ABC analysis to D, Rudolph Dreikurs. And Rudolph's, you'll get this in the learning module, but his module is, excuse me, his model focuses on the greatest human psychological need, which is to belong to others. We desire a sense of community, of being valued, being a contributing member to a group, taking on more duties, responsibilities within that group that we belong to. And like ABA, the ABC analysis, he says, yes, certainly misbehaviors and appropriate behaviors have function. And he identified four of those that we'll get into briefly. He bases it on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you might remember from your child development classes, that although Maslow never depicted it in a pyramid form, although you tend to see that in the textbooks, and you don't need to uh, satisfactorily address a bottom level to move up to a higher level. He saw it, Maslow saw it more like a ladder that you can be struggling to attain proficiency and satisfaction in a number of different areas of life. And Dreiker's mistaken goals is concerned with the sense of belonging stage that you see here in the pyramid. Uh, some kids' families have food insecurity, for example, or no heat in the home in the winter. Those are the physiological needs not being met well. Some kids live in unsafe neighborhoods or abusive homes. That's the safety level of Maslow's hierarchy. Some kids are bullied and rejected. Other kids leave one group to join another one that they value more. They're seeking belonging, or their need for belonging isn't met in the bullying example, the rejection example. And some people struggle with self-worth issues, the self-esteem. But having struggles at the lower levels certainly makes it more difficult to meet satisfactorily the needs at the higher levels, but not important. Or, excuse me, it is important, but it is not mandatory that one can struggle at the lower levels and move up towards self-actualization, becoming all that one can be. Yes. And from those that need to belong, the greatest human psychological need, the middle one on Maslow's hierarchy, comes a lot of our behaviors, sometimes inappropriate behaviors that Dreikers calls mistaken goals. And again, you'll find that inside one of your learning modules. And he says, if we don't feel like we belong to a place or a group or a desired individual, the kids don't feel connected with the teacher or the classmates or the school, then chances are they're going to engage in attention-getting behaviors to bring that person or that community to us. We want to belong, okay? And typically, attention seeking will only gain the trappings of belonging. Yes, people who like each other have a close physical distance. They a closer physical distance. And certainly attention-seeking behavior in the classroom will bring the teacher close. And there'll be eye contact that people who like each other give, but this eye contact's different. And people who like each other talk with each other, and the teacher will say something to the student. Now, this is not what the student is seeking, really genuine affection and connection. But for some kids, negative attention's better than no attention at all. At least I exist in this world. I am influencing this world. It's a mistaken goal, the student seeking attention in the way he or she does. But if we punish these pesky behaviors repeatedly, then the student's going to become resentful. He or she or they is going to engage us in power struggles. And they will bring the trappings of belonging. Again, educators will approach, educators will talk, educators will give direct eye contact. It's as close as this kid knows how to come to getting appropriate attention. So we punish that behavior, and the resentment builds, and the student moves into revenge, destroys the bulletin board when somebody isn't looking, writes graffiti somewhere in the classroom that we can't pin on that student. But this student will then make our lives miserable because the student doesn't feel attached to us, connected to us, doesn't feel that sense of belonging. But we can punish this kid into submission, perhaps, if our punishments are strong enough, and that's where our kids lose their motivation. I ain't doing anything, or they skip work, they skip school, they don't show up. And so you'll find out more about Dreiker's mistaken goals, and you'll apply it in your part 2 paper.
All right, this is my slide. So just put them all up, please. So just going to review. Basically, in your paper for part 2, there's different subsections that you need to have. We recommend that you do subheadings in your paper, and then you respond to each section. If you're asking like what's the minimum amount for each section, it varies. You can look at the exemplar. For my class, we submit earlier. When something's not there for that section or that criteria, I'll let you know and you can revise. Both of us would agree if you wait or you submit late, cannot guarantee you that you'd have an opportunity to revise based on our feedback. So if you submit earlier, that's um, stuff with that. So let me just go over these sections. Again, I encourage you to think about these as subheadings. And doesn't mean that it's could be a half page, page, 2 page, 3 pages. Not well, maybe not 3 pages, but there's different things when you put the forms in, it can come lengthy. But think about each of these as a sort of a separate, smaller response or smaller paper. Review the student target definition behavior. So that's just a copy and paste review of the thing that you said originally. Description of how you went about collecting the data. So important, right? We need to know not just what form you use, but how you did that. Presentation of the data in organized form. If you go back to this video, Dr. Mack talked about that. And there's different places that you could actually submit your forms itself. In some cases, it's not feasible because you have too many forms to submit those. So there's different options with that. But the important part is, unless you share the data that you collected, you really can't do the analysis of the data. So we need to have some presentation of the data and analysis of the data. The behavioral objective learning goal, task analysis, which you went over very deeply, multi-step procedure. That is important to follow the module that will help you understand task analysis. Don't attempt to do task analysis without doing that module. Then differential reinforcement. Again, there's a module specifically on that. A lot of people skip this part. And in my class, I often have to send it back. So you do that. What's the self-monitoring procedure? Even if you're in an aspect of kids with spectrum or whatever, what is the aspect of self-monitoring? This is a big issue for both Dr. Mack and I. It's not just about us looking at surface behavior, it's also including the student in this process, and that allows for that. ABC analysis, which he went over, and then using the ABC analysis to complete the behavior replacement plan. Mistaken goals analysis, again, has the different videos. Dr. Mack went extensively over the last 7 minutes in this video about this allows you to go under the iceberg, not things on the surface, and then suggestions to the family's parents. That's a lot, and often that's the second thing that people often leave out. Besides the self-monitoring, they often forget to leave out when you have all this data collected. What would you suggest to the parents? Um, and then a suggestion sandwich note to the classroom audit adult. Okay, those are the sections. Some of them can be very short, some of them can be a little bit longer, whatever you need to present your data. But that's why we spent so much time tonight, because this is a rather extensive paper, or papers. I view it as like 10 short papers within one thing, and you want to make sure you have the time to do them. Thank you, Dr. Mack. So we can keep on going.
Yes, and we didn't address the suggestion sandwich note to a classroom adult. You will study that in the learning modules, but essentially we find that people are more likely to accept our suggestions when in a situation we find something positive to say. And then we offer our constructive criticism, and then we follow up with something positive to say or some encouragement that we believe in them and know they can do that. You'll find out more about that in our learning modules. So we hope that you at least have a general idea of what we're looking for. More specificity will be offered in the exemplars, in the modules, and in your communication with us.
Yeah. So,
And
yeah, so we've been on an hour and a half. We want to encourage you. It's a lot to process. So there is a video here. You can go back, but honestly, you got this. It's do the modules, um, continue to use our sessions to bring in your data and share your data earlier with us, and we can give you feedback. Be proactive. This is you got this. It's not Dr. Mack's been doing it 20 years. I've only been doing it
that's an
10 years.
underestimate, but yes.
Yeah. Been doing it a long time. So we thank you for, first of all, thank you for putting up with us for, an hour and 15 minutes of the lecture. And you can go back to this, but yeah, we do have it organized. It is very manageable, um, particularly within the next month, and go with that. And we will definitely be staying on to answer questions that you might